Hello, everyone. Good evening. Glad to have you here tonight. We're just waiting for just a minute while people filter through our Zoom doors. It takes just a little bit. Okay. So I'll just start with some very simple things. So any late arrivals will not miss much. You will notice at the bottom of your screen, there is an icon that says Q&A. And our conversation will happen this evening, and we will be answering questions at the end of our conversation. And I would invite you to, at any point in the discussion tonight, you can certainly click on that Q&A icon and a little box will appear. You can enter your question into the Q&A little box and send it along, and it will be received on our end. And we will do our best to make sure that as many questions can be answered at the end of the evening as we can possibly do in the time that we have. So thank you for that. My name is Kelly Greenlee. I am the Community Outreach Librarian at Prince Memorial Library, and very excited about this evening's conversation. We've been looking forward to it for quite a long time, so it's nice that it's finally arrived. It is the third in a series of conversations that we're calling the Changemaker series. And that series includes people with whom we're having conversations, people who are making a difference in our community and in Maine. And tonight's conversation is the third in the series. And you can see recordings of previous conversations that we've had on our website at princememorial.org. So before we start officially, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the land beneath our feet. It is land that nourishes us and sustains us. And in doing this and acknowledging the land, let's remember with gratitude the indigenous people, the Wabanaki people, who for hundreds of years have inhabited and cared for this land upon which we work and play. And we give thanks for your stewardship. So with that said, I would like to introduce Thomas Bennett. He is the director of my library, Prince Memorial Library. He is a historian, and some of you may recognize him. He has just finished a two-part series for us on the archaeology of Casco Bay. You can see that recording on our website as well, princememorial.org. I'm getting all sorts of plugs in today, aren't I? So without further ado, let me introduce Thomas Bennett.
Thank you, Kelly, and good evening, everyone. I'm really pleased to welcome Barry Dana to the room tonight. I first met Barry in 2016 when we dug down at Broad Cove Reserve. Barry came down at the behest of the Chebeague and Cumberland Land Trust. They brought him down for 2 mornings to work with the 6th grade classes that came to the dig. He taught them native life ways and was just very integral part of that program of doing the archaeology, but also doing some perspective on the native people who created that archaeological site. Since then, I've seen Barry at Pineland Trails a couple times. One time he did the 50-miler, and last year he did the 24-hour. Most recently, I spoke with Barry when I was preparing for my talk on archaeology, trying to get his perspective. And out of that conversation, we decided that we would invite him here tonight to give his perspective on not just the archaeology that we're doing in Maine, but on the Native experience in Maine. We had Molly and Dana, Barry's daughter, as the first Changemaker series participant, and it was just fabulous. And through that, and having spoken with Barry before, I knew that having Barry here tonight would be just as fabulous. So Barry, Dana, welcome. Really looking forward to this, talking to you and getting your input on the Native, your Native journey up to now, but also the journey of the Penobscot, of the Wabanaki, and the current events that have been in the news most recently. So welcome, Barry. The first thing I'd like to ask you is, I wrote the paragraph introducing you to the people who are in the audience tonight, but how would you rewrite that paragraph describing yourself and who you are now and where you've come from?
Well, I come from the Penobscot Nation, first and foremost, which, as I was growing up there, was nothing more than a couple islands in the middle of the Penobscot River. So you realize that at one time, the entire territory that we are all sitting in, most probably everybody in this Zoom call, was Native territory. And we got reduced to a few islands in the middle of the river. And we survived it. Can you imagine that? And I think that survival trait, established the values of the Native people that I grew up with and who were my mentors and my elders. Really amazing people that had amazing stories to tell. And I was kind of a rare duck in that I would actually sit and listen to them. As much as I went out and played baseball and run and hide and everything else with the other kids, I always found time, and I wasn't the only one. We found time to sit with the elders and just listen to their stories about going behind enemy lines in the World War I and doing the code talking, things like that. So my upbringing has been very, very deep in Native thinking, Native wisdom, Native values. And I think having to be survivors really came through in how I was raised by my mom and my grandmother and my grandfather as well. So, and then like anybody else in life, you go off to high school and then college, and you have a family and you have a house, and then you get older and you still have a house, but the family has moved out, and then you find, well, what's my purpose now? I've made myself available for the last few decades to be an educator of what it needs education. And I find that there's a lot of education that is needed still. As much as we've been here, as much as non-Native people have been here, there's still a mountain to climb in terms of understanding Native wisdom, Native thinking, Native perspective. I get a lot of people thinking they do, when in fact, it's a hit or miss, or it's just a total miss. Even the simple land acknowledgements are a double-edged sword. When we hear a land acknowledgement, it's an acknowledgement that there was genocide here and our land was stolen. So it's a reminder of that, as well as a heartfelt, acknowledgement that we're still here and we've been here for 12,000+ years. So that's a hard thing to give up on. And I think being truly Native at heart, you carry that burden to remember the ancestors and never to forget, what they went through, so that that legacy, that heritage, that history gets passed on to all generations. So I make myself available to schools, to groups, to anybody who feels it's their time finally to learn from a Native about Native issues. And that may not be a real easy thing to do. I find sometimes that I say things and I get those funny looks like, what does that really mean? I think I know what it means, but I'm not sure. And I think it stems from two different cultures. You know, the culture that I was raised in. It guides my thinking and my talk. So, you know, if I say something and you're like, whoa, what was that? What does that mean? You know, force me to explain it further if I can. So my whole life right now is about education and preserving Native ways, teaching my own people things that we have had to let go in order to survive the new way of the colonized living, and to revive some of those ancient skills and to bring them into the present so that we have a sense of Native identity again, that we're not minorities in our own place. So I spend a lot of time giving words a lot of thinking, giving what people have written, giving that some thought as to, does that really make sense? And that includes Native authors, Native people who have been disconnected from their traditions, having been forced to live a colonized lifestyle. Maybe they go off and get a great education, degrees. They still lack that cultural connection. And I find that I can use my experiences in life to help them along their journey, to get our story told correctly. So I challenge everything that's ever been written, whether it was a French priest in 16, whatever, or a Native author today. I challenge it because it needs to be challenged to see if it makes sense. So that's what I spend my life doing these days. All right, so it's all about education and preserving Penobscot, Wabanaki heritage, culture, traditions, things of that nature.
So you've been heavily involved in the preservation of that culture. And I know from reading about your upbringing that you mentioned the elders. And I read about how you spent a lot of time with the elders when you were a youngster, learning the traditional Penobscot culture. Can you tell us something about the elders, how somebody becomes an elder, and that transfer of cultural knowledge that you benefited from, and now you're turning around and transferring that to the younger people of the Penobscot Nation today?
Yeah, for me, growing up on the res, the elders, obviously they were the older people, no question. And they still were doing their thing. To survive in a new colonized era, people made baskets and, trinkets and, carving sticks, war clubs. And those, the artists, those are the ones I mainly hung around. And I would just sit there and watch them work on their thing and sometimes help them. I was lucky enough to help. As I got older, they actually paid me to help prepare their materials. So that was pretty cool. I got gas in my car and I was able to be, a highly functional young college kid, pounding ash and doing things like that. One elder in particular was a really mysterious fellow. He was a hardcore alcoholic, and he lived in a very small shack with a wood stove, a bed, a table, and 2 chairs. Probably 1 window, if I remember correctly. And around the walls were shelves, and on the shelves were from all around, wall to wall, had like large pickle jars on them with no labels, but in each jar was a different plant. And he would point to them around the room. He'd say, this is this, and it's used for this. So he was what we considered at that time our last medicine man. And there really were more medicine people, but for us, he was the one that allowed us into his place, and he would teach us and talk to us about his stories. He was in the World War I, behind enemy lines. He was a code talker with the other Wabanaki people, and he was just full of stories and laugh, and it was just a treasure that us kids really, I think we were gifted something very special, because it's not just a story either. It's that individual spending time with them. and how, even though he was an alcoholic, he would, you know, he appreciated people coming in, and he shared with so much. And then there were many other elders I would follow up into the woods, as we called it. We used to have woods on the island at one time. Now it's all housing. Yeah, and gather plants. And I remember that. And I remember just so many stories. And then I had an opportunity with my grandfather to spend time with us. He lived up on one of the islands further up all by himself. And he was a basket maker. He was a guide for the log drives. I mean, there was nothing he couldn't do. And he told me stories about when they were young, they would snowshoe from what is now called Indian Island to Madeline, which is in Lincoln, which is 39 miles upriver. They would snowshoe up the river and be there before dark. And, you know, that got my wheels spinning, because I know, and this other elder, our medicine person, he would run from Indian Island to Bucksport Sunday night, because he attended a residential school down in Bucksport. And then Friday after school, he would run home, and that was 30 something miles, and he was only in high school. So I grew up with these elements of traditional Native thinking and traditions that was still passed down over the hundreds of years, even through colonization, settlers being here. So that word of mouth, that oral traditions, you know, they still kept a lot of that alive, you know, and hunting and fishing and things like that.
So what about Madeline Shea? I think she was instrumental in
Yeah.
a couple of your pursuits, the preservation of the language
Yeah.
and your basket making. If you could tell us who Madeline was and how
Sure.
you came to benefit so greatly from her
Yeah.
wisdom.
I got a teaching job at the island school elementary, and my job was a full-time culture teacher. They had tried to do this before with elders coming in to make baskets, but elders, you know, it was hard for them to have a class and teach everybody a basket making. And once they did it, the class was over and there was no more cultural education. So they decided to make a full-time teaching job. I was a certified teacher, plus I knew the culture, so I applied for that and I got it. And I was in seventh heaven, teaching culture to Penobscot kids. About, I don't know, maybe it was even my first year teaching. A friend of mine said his grandmother just moved back from Connecticut and she was fluent in the language and she was a basket maker and she's looking for molds and gauges. Those are tools that you need to make baskets. So I told my grandmother that, and and when I told her it was Madeline Shea, she said, "Oh my goodness." They were chums growing up on the reservation in their younger days before Madeline moved off to Connecticut. So she gave me molds and gauges, and I took them down to Madeline, and boy, she was pleased. And overnight, you know, she started whipping out ash baskets. And so I went to the school and I said, you know, can I spend time with Madeline so that I can be brought up to speed on language and basket making? So they said, sure. So we scheduled that in my daily teaching time to make sure I had an hour here or there to run across the street. She lived right across the road from the school. And I would spend time with her learning language and basket making. And then I would bring it right back across the road to the kids and I would teach them. I finally was fortunate enough to have a short-term sabbatical where I spent a lot more time with Madeline. And that's when I learned more about basket making, because we actually had time to make baskets and I would help prepare material for her. And, you know, I would prepare all this material and I'm getting language instruction. I'm getting this instruction from her and we weren't paying her, but she insisted that she pay me for the material that I said, no, that I'm here learning and that's my pay. So, but that, you know, if you work for something, you got paid for it. That's the way she was. So, and then I set up a time where her, Madeline Shea, and my grandmother could sit together and talk about old times. And I had a recorder, I had a tape going, a video. They wouldn't say a word. I would ask them questions, you know, like you're doing to me. No, they'd say, yeah. So you guys were kids, you know, you grew up on the island and you know, yeah. So I said, why don't we take a break and get down to the teacher's room and get a coffee? So we did. They got into the coffee room and they started telling old stories and laughing. That's what I wanted on tape. So, you know, they really carried old Native thinking. The way they worded sentences, the things they talked about, that's what I grew up hearing. And I swear it's why I can't spell anything right in English. Because I have those Native voices in my head, how you pronounce words. And so that's my excuse.
But now, Madeline worked with Ash making her baskets. You sort of rebelled against that with your basket making, if my understanding is correct. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, to honor her, I had to do Ash, and I did. I made an Ash basket. And when she was satisfied with my proficiency, then I was allowed to live. If you want to honor a teacher, you do as they've instructed. You don't take shortcuts and you don't make mistakes. And if you did, you took the mistake out and you started over. She was tough. And I think some of that passed off, rubbed off onto me as a teacher, because if you're going to learn how to make a fire, you can't mess up. Your life, someone else's life may depend on that. So you learn and you pay attention and you honor them by doing it as they instructed. So I did the Ash. I paid my dues, got that behind me. And she said, as long as you make baskets, you'll never be without money. So, well, I was a teacher. I was getting a salary. I didn't need to make baskets for money. And then I don't know when it started, but it was a long time ago. Native basket makers got together. Teresa Secord was the organizer, and she created what she called the Maine Indian Basket Alliance. I had a little trouble with that name, Maine Indian. I'm no Maine's Indian. I'm Wabanaki and I'm Penobscot. All right, get that out of the way, right? Anyway, she got a nonprofit going and she started having basket shows. And it was mostly for Ash baskets. And I was kind of keeping an eye on that. And I thought, being knowledgeable about Penobscot culture, if I was to want to be proficient in a basket and make money, or not even the money, but if you're going to live in a Penobscot cultural lifestyle pre-contact, birch bark is going to be your first choice. You need to know how to fashion a wigwam, a canoe, baskets, leggings, eye goggles, a million things you can make out of birch bark. So I took it upon myself as a cultural preservationist and teacher to bring back the birch bark culture. So I got an invitation to the first show, and I said, but I don't make Ash baskets, because that's what it was all about. Maine Indian Basket Alliance was all about Ash baskets. So you're kind of right. I kind of said, well, I'm going, but I'm not taking any Ash baskets. I'm taking birch bark, because that's the only thing I knew how to make at that time, and that's what I had materials to do. So I did that. And they were just rough bowls. They were kind of, I like making them and all, but they weren't your high-end art like we see today. And I sold all those baskets, and I thought, wow, that was fun. And it was so cool getting together with all the Wabanaki from the other tribes, all together in the same place, like the University of Maine at Orono, talking, laughing. And they fed us lunch, and then around 2:00 in the afternoon, we get together and we drum and sing. So, this is a good time for Native people. And I really got to treasure those get-togethers. And as a result, it inspired me to take the birch bark work further and bring my art into the basket making for the decorative part of basket making. So you can see this painting behind me. It's a two-dimensional paint, art. It's oil on canvas. So I like doing that. I like capturing scenes, faces, especially Native faces. And if you want, I can show you one of my baskets right now, if you want.
Would love it, please.
Okay. So this is birch bark. So you can see it's made of birch bark. Okay, that sound, that cool. And then I take and I bring to life the ancestors by etching their faces into the red cambium layer. That's done by getting it wet and then scraping the red layer off. There's no pre-sketching, there's no nothing to go by other than a picture that I'm using as a photo reference. So this is what I do for our basket shows. Here we are over here. Okay.
So baskets are not the only thing you make with birch bark. After high school, I believe you made your first birch bark canoe and you reinvigorated a Penobscot tradition. Can you tell us something about the traveling from, I don't want to call it Indian Island because I know you don't like that term and it sounds, what would you prefer that we call it? If not Indian
You know,
Island?
those of us from the island, we call it the island.
The island. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
that works
so
fine.
you made a birch bark canoe. Apparently your first one didn't go so well. Maybe you can tell us about that. And then what you did with that canoe that really continues to this day, insofar as restarting a tradition of, maybe you can tell us about it.
When I taught at the school, my job was to teach Penobscot culture, and the school board gave me a total blank, curriculum pad and said, you do it. You just do what you want to do. And birch bark canoe is too big of a project to do it in school. But once that seed got planted, it was growing fast. So I traveled out to New Hampshire and I met Henry Valancourt. Probably, I'm guessing he's French, but he made birch bark canoes. And we spent an entire day together and he showed me 3 different canoes he was making in progress. So I got to see all the parts to a canoe. And he talked to me about how to do a canoe as much as I could try to understand in one long day. And then I drove home and I tried to do a canoe that summer. Just from that one experience, it didn't go too well. So that particular canoe never saw the water. It saw the wood stove. It made great kindling. But I was really determined to failure sometimes can be the best thing. So it was an epic failure, but it prompted me to really dig deep. So I went to Canada this time and I had a day, again, just a day, not even a full day, with a traditional native birch bark canoe maker. And he was also a very wise medicine type person. So it was just a very spiritual time being up there with the Algonquin people. But I also picked up a book, Edwin Adney Tappan, whatever his name is. And he diagrammed all the canoes. He messed up in explaining and writing how to do a canoe. So that basically was kind of impossible. But it did offer a lot of insight to the materials and dimensions. So I said, I think I can do it this time. I was pretty confident, and I got together a tiny grant that helped cover some of the food. And I had 6 youth from the school, all boys, down to my house, and they camped out in the yard, and we built a birch bark canoe that summer. We brought the canoe up to the island and had a grand ceremony where the parents and community members showed up, and the kids took the canoe out into the Penobscot River. And the comment I heard on that day was, we haven't seen a birch bark canoe in this water for over 60 years. That was the first. It was a pretty ugly canoe, but it worked. It had all its parts. It had the bark, the ribs, the thwarts, the root lacings, the spruce gum, pitching. It actually had a pretty decent form for racing. I guess my canoe racing kind of snuck in there somehow when we designed the bow ends. But okay, so that wasn't good enough either, because that, when you see a good Penobscot birch bark canoe from the old days, I mean, they were a lot better. So I happened to find another fellow who was a birch bark canoe master. And we brought him, when I was in office, we brought him to the island, and he spent 3 weeks with us teaching, and we made a birch bark canoe. So there was several students involved from start to finish. And we got a canoe made, finished it on a Thursday in August. The next morning, that canoe paddled up the Penobscot River all the way to the location that you see in this painting on one of our annual Katahdin 100s. And the paddlers were the people who made the canoe, and they did it in relay, 2 at a time. They'd go upriver a ways, and they would trade off. It was pretty powerful, powerful time having that canoe on the Penobscot River. And it seemed even more powerful the closer we got to the mountain. You know, as we were going up above the last dam, and then into the West Branch, that got to be pretty special. Seeing the canoe in its ancestral waters in the shadow of the mountain, you know, that's what it's about. Reviving. When you revive culture like that, you're really bringing the ancestral emotional aspect out of your genetic code, and it's like they're alive again. That's kind of how we operate.
So I'm looking at a statement that you made, I think around 2002, that you say, quote, the Penobscot River, we're inextricably tied to the Penobscot River through a cultural, physical, and spiritual relationship. How does Katahdin play into that, that spirituality with the river? And you have a mountain. If the river is the blood in your veins, what is Katahdin to you?
Well, I think those in Christianity would call it the altar. You know, that's their special spot, right? For me, I would never call it an altar, but it's a sacred place. And to me, it holds the deepest knowledge. It holds the deepest energy of everything that flows and grows and is in its shadow around it. So for Penobscot, we go back every year to the mountain to be immersed in that energy. And words can't describe it. No words I could say, even being native, would describe the power that mountain offers to its people. It's like a battery, you know, can't quite jump the engine. As soon as we go to the mountain, we are recharged. And it seems like it needs to be an annual thing. So, you know, because a whole year goes by. I mean, when you're in the presence of the mountain, and we don't go to the top, there's reasons for that. So when I see people climbing all over the top and they're standing up on top of the sign and they're doing the big thing, you know, because they finished the AT, that's a special moment for them. But for natives seeing that, you kind of look at them like, you know, why don't you respect that mountain? You shouldn't be all ego and celebratory about what you did. You should. It's a place to be quiet and spiritual and thankful. But anyway, that's the clash of cultures. So when we go there, we are being recharged, and it's like our genetic DNA is just on fire. It understands that connection. And there's a lot of things that happen when we do these journeys that, you know, we don't talk about outside of being there. We just mention it when we're there, and we're always trying to bring more people into it, more Wabanaki people into it, so that we have that grounding for who we are as Native people. Because it really does. It's on a physical level. You know, it's like it gets the DNA just, you know, woken up. So it's our life beginning, really. I mean, it's like we have our creation stories, and they tend to come from that mountain, that place. So
you've done a number of endurance events over the years. You are the only known person to ski-oar the Can-Am 250. And if people in the audience don't know what ski-oar is, that means he was pulled behind a sled dog team on cross-country skis for 250 miles over 5 days, if I'm not mistaken, something like
4
that.
days. Yeah.
4 days.
4 days, 5 dogs.
You already mentioned Pineland, but some of the other ones, you hiked the AT from Mount Washington to Katahdin to honor your uncle who passed away in the 60s, I believe. or
I
the
think it was late
70s,
sixties. Yeah,
late 60s.
yeah.
More recently, well, that was in 2017 you did that, but then a couple of months later, you did the 100-mile wilderness in under 48 hours.
Uh-huh.
And Butch Phillips, I believe he is your uncle as well.
Mhm.
He said that something to the effect that the more arduous the task, the more spiritual it is. Do you agree with those words? And if so, what's the most spiritual thing that you've done so far as, difficult events of that sort?
They all are equal. The degree of difficulty, I don't even like to see it in that light. Sure, I was in pain, but to identify it as such sort of takes away from the end result, which was where it all culminated. But you grow up listening to stories where your people were runners and they did 200 miles at a time. That doesn't just go in one ear and out the other for me. It gets lodged deep. And I don't believe they suffered doing it. They were too good at it. The Raramari people of Mexico are still running 200 to 400 miles at a time, and they're laughing while they're doing it. I suffered because I'm not a gifted pro ultra runner. I take as little, I always say when I enter a race, if they knew how little I trained, that I wouldn't be allowed to race. I just have the ability to see the finish and not lose sight of it and make sure I get there. So I think the trek from Mount Washington, and I even hate to call it that. I wish I knew the original name. That's George Washington does not deserve to have a mountain named after him. Not what he did to Native people. Not one of our native spiritual mountains. It just doesn't set right. But anyway, same thing goes with Baxter. It doesn't deserve a peak. Sorry. My uncle died on that mountain in a plane crash. So I think that the suffering was all the years that his body had never been returned back to the island. My family suffered. So I watched that growing up. And I finally got to a point where I thought we need to bring his spirit home. We couldn't bring his body home, but I think we could bring his spirit home. So I went to we Pinkham Notch is where the plane went down. We went to the Pinkham Notch parking area. We went up and gathered, sticks and twigs from that area where his spirit was. Made a fire. We carried the ashes from that fire all the way to Katahdin. And I would really like to validate that suffering spirituality connection, but I'm gonna separate them for the time being, because it was just plain spiritual. There were moments I suffered. I was tired. I was hungry. I was dehydrated. I was crabby. And we just instantly know that that's part of the experience. And we know that's temporary and it just goes away. And, and so when we got to the mountain, that all that stuff is just, tools in a toolbox. But now we have something completed, and I gifted my family those ashes, and we left them at Katahdin. So, but yeah, a 10K is not going to cut it. If you're going to do something spiritually, that's why we do the Katahdin 100 every year. It's 100 miles. And what really makes it spiritual is like a lot of the people who do it. They're not athletes. They're not out training year round. They're not out running marathons. They don't have a cool down period and intense period. They just get out and walk it. They jump on a canoe and paddle it, or they jump on a bike and bike it. But what it's about is bringing our bodies back to that mountain and reconnecting. So yeah, they were suffering along the way, but the whole experience is the ceremony, and it is very spiritual for us.
So I'm wondering if we can switch gears here and talk about Penobscot politics and your time as a chief, what you hope to achieve, what you were frustrated by, and how that really changed your outlook on what you're doing today. Can you tell us something about Penobscot politics and how I read somewhere that you were elected on a campaign of change? Is the process similar to what we see in white society?
Unfortunately, yeah. And I'm gonna beat on my chest a little bit and say that for 4 years we didn't have politics. I wanted politics out of the picture. Politics is when you make promises you don't plan on keeping. It's when you don't have the integrity to be a leader. You fake it by saying whatever needs to be said and having people believe it. And creating allies to get votes and all that other stuff. I do not subscribe to politics. My reason for running for chief was to bring back the old style of traditional leadership. You know, I had really good models in my life, and Malcolm Butch being one of them. But my grandmother was a really big part of my growing up and education, and she didn't like this adopting the white man's way of electing leaders. That's insane. How can one person be a leader for the tribe? Our chiefs were not leaders like one. We always had that one chief after colonization came. The English would only recognize one guy. That's why we adopted that system, and it's not right. But anyway, having a traditional thinking, wanting it to be traditionally native, interfered with the idea of politics. So I tried to not allow any mention of the word politics while I was in office. This isn't politics. I'm not going to maneuver things for my own sake. And if I'm not reelected, then I'm not reelected. I can't let down on that value of trying to continue traditional Penobscot values. And they flew in the face of current times. Money was more important than leadership. That's just the nature of the beast. When people are struggling to make ends meet, they want to be promised money. So we didn't have money to be promising. Seeing why I wanted to run for the leadership position, and back then it was called governor. That just tells you how colonized we were. We called our chief governor. Oh my goodness. And but I didn't fight with that. I just wanted to get in because we were at that time looking at being sued by the state of Maine. And our sovereignty was going to be on the table. And I said, I think I got to jump in now. I think this is where passion can help lead. So that's why I got in. I wanted to, and there was a lot about it I didn't know. There's a lot of legality stuff that is just so hard to learn. And I was on a sharp curve upwards trying to learn, once I got elected. And I had some really good people, filling me in on the whole story. And it really taught me a lot about how political this state of Maine is. And I just think it's so sad that, your governors can lie. People know they lie, and it's accepted. And they lied to us in this process of trying to negotiate, a peaceful agreement for pollution going into our river. And it was strange to think that, the white government of Maine was okay with polluting the Penobscot River. to the point where it's allowable to have so many fish dead and so many eagles dead. How does this get into the minds of people that this is okay? It wasn't okay with us. So I came in at a time where, I had the ability to use a native thinking, a native voice to combat that. And I think, for the time that I was in, we were able to hold that off, having the state have permission to, sole authority to grant those pollution permits to the paper industry. After my time in office, it finally went at a higher level in court, and we lost that judgment. So, I'm not really sure what else to answer in terms of that, but when you say politics, it's like that's a dirty word for me right now. Because that's how the game is played. That's the reality, and I think that's probably why I didn't last in politics for longer than I did.
So recently, just within the past couple of weeks, the Supreme Court chose not to hear the appeal on Penobscot River rights for the Penobscot. And Governor Mills decided that LD 1626 would not go forward right now. That would have restored some native sovereignty. Those are definite defeats, I see, for the Penobscot, but there have also been some good news out of the legislature, specifically with the Passamaquoddy water rights, that sort of thing. How do you see the relationship between the state of Maine and the federal government and the native tribes right now?
Okay, so I am not in the driver's seat for this. I am on a few circles away from the center, but I think you can almost separate it out a little bit. Instead of saying the Penobscot Nation relationship with the state of Maine, although that's exactly what it is, we have gained so much support in the legislature, senators and and the House on both sides of the aisle. Probably more support today than ever on big issue. And let me correct something. This isn't about the state of Maine restoring sovereignty.
Right.
That's like restoring Katahdin. It's there, it's ours, it's occupied. This is about the state of Maine recognizing inherent sovereignty that goes back 12,000 years. The state of Maine has no authority over our sovereignty. They're just in the driver's seat as far as the power. They're the ones that have the state police. The state of Maine has that stupid, illogical concept of ownership, title of our lands. And I use this type of approach to try to get at that inherent sense that it is totally insane to think that occupiers can come in and remove us from our lands, and we no longer own them. We no longer have authority over them. We get pushed onto a small island, and even then the river gets taken away from us. This is insane thinking. This is colonized thinking. It's cultural genocide. And how the people of the state of Maine can be okay with that blows my mind. The good thing is many aren't okay with it. They want to see my people's sovereignty recognized. And you know what? We're not even asking for the state to recognize our inherent sovereignty in legality wise in the paperwork. It's just the watered down version called federal recognition. If we could just get the state to do that, we'd be fine. But the state can't even do that. Why? Is it racism? Is it fear? I've told every bonehead governor you guys have had, you recognize our sovereignty and everybody in this state benefits. The tribe with federal recognition brings players to the table for water quality, for air quality, for natural resources protection. Isn't that what Maine is supposed to be all about? So I don't get it. And I think I don't want to get it. I don't want it explained to me. until I actually see it in process. And I think my daughter Mullion is just really hitting home runs out of the park, but someone up in the stand keeps throwing the ball back in. And it's too bad. It's really too bad. You know, a thing that could be a beautiful relationship has to be thwarted by politics. That has to end. It has to end, because it's not making Maine look very well. I'll give credit where it's due. We had Indigenous Peoples Day recognized. That's a beautiful thing. We had mascots outlawed. That's a beautiful thing. But those were pawns on the table that we knew at the time of their acceptance that, you know, it would be feathers in the cap, but it's not meat on the table. You know, it's crumbs. And when it comes down to the number one issue that Native people are fighting for, it's that recognition of our sovereignty. And I guarantee you, I could have anybody in this audience challenge me on that. What do you fear that we wouldn't benefit the entire state of Maine, aside from gaming? I don't want to talk about gaming. I'm not into this for gaming. I'm into this for the sovereignty piece, which can exclude gaming, but it doesn't. That's the problem. Federal recognition creates an avenue for gaming. And I just think we'd have been better off if we hadn't talked about it. We just talk about the other aspects of the sovereignty issues.
So I know Chief Francis and his counterparts on the Passamaquoddy reservations, they came out with a statement that they're willing to work towards the measures included in 1626, that they have faith that there are players who want to see this passed, more Native rights restored. Do you have that same hope for the future?
I have to say yes. And again, it's not restored, okay?
Right.
Recognized.
Recognized.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a given. We can never give up on that. Never. I don't care who is governor. I don't care who's in the legislature. They're going to have to deal with this, because unfortunately we are neighbors in the same location. And as the powers played out to be, we are stuck with each other. And just think, ever since that stuck back to 1820, we have not been on good terms. Are we not civilized human beings or not?
One hopes.
There's been great strides made, though, great relationships, even within the internal aspects of the tribal state relationships. Really good things have happened. There's a lot of great people at their level doing everything they can. They want clean water. I've talked with people in the DEP. They want clean water and clean air. They're frustrated too. Their deal isn't the sovereignty piece like it is with mine, because when our sovereignty is recognized, we have a seat at the table when those permits are issued. And Governor King did not like that.
Okay, Barry, it looks like we have about 6 questions. Would you like to take a couple questions at this point?
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is from Stephen and Christina, talking about the Wabanaki code talkers in the World War I era. Can you give references for teachers about them?
No.
Okay. You've referenced elders who were raised with Native thinking. How would you describe that to non-Natives?
Good question. Again, I keep saying recognize our sovereignty, right? That gets to the core of who we are. We are our own people. It's a good question. One that I would need more examples like that to play out. When I go to the coast, I'll share this. When I go to the coast or Baxter State Park, I really grind my teeth. I see occupation, I see colonization, and I see the removal of Native people from our homelands. I don't know if they could understand how that feels. So there again, it's like if I was talking a completely different language that you've never heard before, you just wouldn't get it. How does that feel to be looking at this beautiful home out looking over the ocean and know that that was my ancestors' home at one time? I still get that. And I don't want to ignore that. And I want that to be heard and maybe someday validated in a manner of reconciliation.
Okay, here's one from Eloise. What advice do you have for non-native people working with Native youth, especially when it comes to outdoor leadership and social emotional skills?
Careful. Be careful not to try to be native. You cannot, like tonight, we decided it was best for me to do this talk because there's no way I could convey to a non-native to do this talk for me. Raising children, native children, are best done with native parents. Teaching native children is best done with native teachers. If you're not native, but you still have this responsibility, then bring in native people as often as you can. Find out what sources are appropriate. There's a lot of sources that are no good. Penobscot Nation has done a lot of work to pinpoint what sources work for education and what sources don't. I would ask people not to appropriate native ceremonies, native imagery. And I know the main camps do that. I've talked with them and a lot of them have stopped, but there's still more private camps thinking they can teach their kids to be Indian by having ceremonies around a fire at night. Things like that do not go well and not appreciated. But to raise those kids, if it's your job to teach and raise them, then raise them as human beings, love and all the nurturing that it takes to raise a child. But when you want to get into native education, you want native people to be part of that journey.
Here's one from Jen. She wants to know, what advice do you give Maulian, who is working in politics as a Penobscot Nation's tribal ambassador in the Maine legislature? Well, one thing I'd just like to point out, Barry's mother was tribal clerk for 19 years. Mm-hmm. So she was in a public service position with the tribe. Barry obviously was both as a teacher and his work as chief, and now Maulian is. So there's a real continuity there of service to the nation. So yeah. Is that something that you just encouraged her to do, or what are we talking about?
I help her the most by staying out of it. She is amazing at what she's doing because she has that ability. Now, she was also, obviously raised by me. And I helped set the stage for this ambassador when I was chief. Our representative came to me and said, I want voting right in the state legislature. And I said, no, that's becoming part of Maine state government. We're sovereign. You are our ambassador. So that was back in 2000. And that concept started growing, and we finally pulled our rep from that arena and then created the ambassador position. And I won't say what Molly and I talk about, but we do talk a lot. And there are times that, she will express some of my thoughts, frustrations, and if I have experience with that particular thing, I will share it with her, and she's grateful for it. But I can tell you, it's rare that I need to step in, and I don't step in, but I don't ever feel the need to step in and say, hey, Molly, what about, I might ask questions. I might, brag about anything I might have tried to do when I was in office, but she's a superstar in what she's doing because she's raised to think native, yet she has the ability to converse with the outside world in a way that they appreciate and understand and respect. So she's just done amazing work. You know, right off the bat, we went into Skowhegan and we got the mascot changed. And I say we, it was a huge group effort, but Mullion took that eagle feather in there and she put it in their face and they all cowered like dogs running from a truck. You know, it was amazing to watch the power this little tiny Penobscot woman had holding that feather up. She just silenced an audience of 300 people. So she did that. I didn't. I stood behind her. And I think that's my role right now.
So this is from Evan. Could you talk a little bit about how, if tourism could be a benefit to the region and tribes to bring awareness?
I have a hard time with tourism. I know the states needs it, but you know, what non-native people refer to nature as resources, right? And when you bring a lot of people into the area, those natural places, you know, it has an effect on them. But if it can be done in a environmentally sensitive way, then you're bringing in new people, I guess, new ideas, but then again, you got to start all over again, educating. So, and there's money to be made. Most of our basket shows are in-state. You know, I think it's mostly participated by in-state people. Some people will come up from Massachusetts that I know of, but I haven't really personally been too crazy about tourism because, you know, I actually live over here on the Kennebec River, and I get to see all the jet skis, the snowmobiles, the four-wheelers, and they're just overrunning everything we call nature. And it's kind of a sad sight to see. You know, our forest lands are clear cut and sprayed by herbicide, but they're not seeing that. They're going to the parks. So the parks are heavily hit, and you got a lot of carbon emissions coming into the state. I don't know if you know this, but Acadia National Park has the worst air in the United States because of, you know, the traffic and the Midwest coal burning comes into our area along the coast. You know, it's just sometimes nature needs a rest, and that's my sense. So I think in terms of if there was an effective way to have the tribes benefit or the state benefit from tourism, I'm probably not the best person to run that by.
Okay, let's do one more here. This is from Steve, who is actually a local legislator. And he says, with the legislative session having come to an end earlier this week, what opportunities for dialogue or collaboration with the state do you foresee between now and the commencement of the next legislative session?
Well, like I said, I'm not in that inner circle. So I can imagine, and I do talk with my daughter, but I can imagine get-togethers. There has to be some momentum coming out of this, I would hope. And, you know, somebody creating a plan by which, you know, the tribes can realize their dreams of having the state recognize our sovereign rights to, you know, to the federal level that all tribes across the United States all get to enjoy. So I would hope that some of the legislators would show leadership and reach out to the tribes. Why not have a caucus? Why not have a Democratic and a Republican caucus get together and invite the tribes in for a brainstorming session? I don't know. I'm out of my league on this a little bit. I don't want to speak for Mullion. I don't want to speak for the tribal leaders. They might have a plan already. I don't want to say my plan would work. I guess what I'm hoping is that dialogue does not stop, because we've made such great gains in you know, both sides of the Capitol. And I think that's amazing work. And I don't want to see that momentum end. We may have a stone wall to face, you know, with the governor's seat, but that's always been the case. And it would be just amazing if the legislators all could get together in a unified, Do you know that tribes don't make decisions unless we have a consensus? That was the old one. Can you imagine if we had a consensus in the state saying, you know, really, this is not a hard thing to do to accept tribal sovereignty within our state. It's really not. Can we get together? Can we do this? Can we make this happen finally? You know, Maine is stolen land. Every square inch of state is stolen land. If you look back at all the treaties, the doctrine of discovery, any good lawyer could make a beautiful case why every square inch is stolen. Even the 1980 Settlement Act is bogus in terms of how it was created, how it was written. So there would be a legal argument for saying we need to set all those things aside and sort of look at where we are. We have tribes that have been basically decimated. What would it hurt allowing them to govern themselves to the same level as tribes all around the United States? I just don't see why that is a problem other than gaming. If I was leading this discussion, I would try to find a way to take gaming, set it aside. Let's talk about the other aspects that, you know, the tribes deserve to have. And if you want gaming, fine, let's talk about that too. But it shouldn't be a deal breaker. It really shouldn't. I mean, you have gaming in the state. So Native people feel like, you know, maybe this is an issue that people don't want to be honest about. Why can non-natives have it? Native people can't. So I personally don't like gaming. I never want to game myself, but that doesn't mean I have the right to dictate for others what their, you know, choice of entertainment is. You know, I led our tribe's effort for gaming in the past, in 2001, 2002 era. And my tribe wanted it. My tribe wanted casino. We had everything in the making that would have made it work really well. And the people of the state of Maine decided they didn't want natives have gaming, but they allowed Bangor to have gaming. Now, there were two different formats, but still gaming is gaming. And that was a hard pill to take. So I took everybody in the tribe and we got back together and got on an economic development role, and we started from scratch. And some of those things did well and some didn't. But that was after my term. So anyway, I just hope that dialogue continues and that some of the state people take on a leadership role instead of forcing the tribes to say, what do you want to do now? You know, there's two parties here, so let's get together.
Well, Barry, thank you for that. Thank you for the last hour and 10 minutes that you've been sitting here talking with us. It's been a real pleasure on my part. I just want to bring up one last thing. I don't know if everybody knows, but in 1991, Barry was named one of People Magazine's 50 most beautiful people. And I think we can see why, you know, just from speaking with you. And I think your mother shepherded that through. So I imagine you have very fond memories of her and the things that such as that she did for you. But again, Barry, really great talking to you tonight. I hope we can continue this conversation at another time. Kelly, did you have a last word for Barry?
Yes, I want to say thank you to you, Barry. One thing that you did not see, or that we did not convey to you, was that we had many messages of thanks to you from our audience tonight.
Oh,
so I just want to convey that message to you. So thank you. This was great. And to people watching, we did record tonight's event. So I will send a link tomorrow and we'll upload it on our website soon. So if you want to spread the word and pass that link along to people when you get it, that would be great. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Thomas. And I would say we can call this a wrap.
Thank you again,
Thank you.
Barry.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Night.